The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and dreamed of what lay beyond. They built telescopes, they sent rockets, they walked on their moon, and finally, after centuries of trying, they broke the barrier that had kept them trapped in their small corner of space. The year was 2347 when the UNSS Prometheus became the first human ship to travel faster than light. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge as reality twisted around her vessel. Colors that had no name flashed across the view screen. Then, in a heartbeat, they were somewhere else. Somewhere very far from home. Elena was 42 years old. She had spent her entire adult life working toward this moment. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple knot, and her brown eyes reflected the strange new stars that surrounded her ship. She had expected to feel joy. Instead, she felt a cold whisper of fear crawling up her spine. "Captain," said her navigator, his voice shaking, "we are receiving a signal. It is not human." The signal did not come through their radio or their computers. It came directly into their minds. Every person on the Prometheus heard the same words at the same moment, spoken in a voice that was older than mountains. "You have entered monitored space. You will come." The ship began to move on its own. Elena shouted orders, but nothing worked. The controls were dead. The engines fired without command. The Prometheus flew through space like a leaf caught in a river, pulled toward something massive and impossible. They arrived at a place that should not exist. It was a sphere made of frozen light, floating in the empty void between galaxies. It was larger than planets. It hummed with a power that made Elena's teeth ache and her heart race. The ship passed through the surface of the sphere like a ghost walking through a wall. Inside, there was only brightness. Elena had to close her eyes against the glare. When she opened them again, she was no longer on her ship. She stood alone in a chamber of crystal and starlight. 7 massive shapes floated before her. They were not solid. They were made of light and thought and something else that human words could not describe. They were the elders. Elena had read the old stories of gods and angels. She had never believed them. But standing before these beings, she understood why ancient humans had fallen to their knees. The elders were so vast, so old, so powerful that her mind struggled to accept what her eyes were seeing. "We are the Conclave." The voices spoke directly into her thoughts. "We have watched this galaxy for 12,000 years. We have seen species rise and fall. We have maintained order. We have maintained peace." Elena tried to speak, but no sound came from her throat. "Your kind is new. Your kind is young. We have studied you. We have judged you." The largest of the elders moved closer. It was like standing before a sun. Elena felt small and cold and afraid. "You are dangerous. You are aggressive. You are unpredictable. Other species grow and learn and find their place in the order of things. But your kind burns too bright. You change too fast. You break what you touch. We mean no harm." Elena finally managed to whisper. "We only want to explore, to learn, to meet others." We have heard such words before. They always say these things. Then they build weapons. Then they conquer. Then they destroy. We will not allow this. The visions began, without warning. Elena screamed as images flooded her mind. She saw cities burning. She saw worlds cracking apart like eggs. She saw billions of creatures running and screaming as fire fell from the sky. She saw species she had never met being erased from existence, their history and culture and dreams wiped away as if they had never been. She saw what the elders could do when they were angry. This is what happens to those who disobey. This is the consequence of defiance. The vision stopped. Elena fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Her body shook. Her mind felt torn and wounded. "Here is our judgment. Here is our warning. Your kind will expand no further. Your colonies will stop at their current borders. You will build no new weapons. You will develop no new technologies of war. You will remain where you are, and you will be watched." Elena looked up at the towering beings of light. "And if we refuse, then you will be erased. Not punished. Not conquered. Erased. Every human world will burn. Every human child will die. Every record of your existence will be destroyed. It will be as if your kind never existed at all." The cold certainty in those words was worse than the visions. The elders were not threatening. They were simply stating facts. They had done this before. They would do it again. Return to your people. Share our warning. You have been given this chance because you are young, because you do not yet understand. But we will not warn again. Elena found herself back on the Prometheus. Her crew gathered around her, their faces pale with fear. They had all seen the visions. Every human, in every colony, had seen them at the same moment. The elders wanted everyone to know. The ship limped home. Elena made her report to the United Human Authority. The leaders gathered in emergency sessions that lasted for weeks. They argued and debated and discussed. But in the end, there was only one choice. Humanity would obey. The following years were hard. The colonies stopped expanding. The military stopped developing new weapons. Scientists were told to focus only on peaceful research. The dreams of exploring the galaxy died quietly in the hearts of billions. People called this time the Cage Era. Humanity was no longer free. They were prisoners, watched always by beings they could not see. Other species traveled past their borders without fear. Other species built empires and traded freely across the stars. But humanity stayed in its cage, too afraid to even rattle the bars. Elena Vasquez retired from the military. She became an advisor to the government. But her heart was no longer in her work. She spent her nights staring at the stars she could never visit, thinking about the visions the elders had shown her. Something about those visions bothered her. She had seen them 1,000 times in her nightmares. The burning worlds, the dying species, the absolute destruction. But there was something wrong, something she could not quite name. It was not until 18 years later that she finally understood what had been troubling her all along. She was looking at old astronomical data when she saw it. The worlds in the visions, the planets that had been destroyed, their positions, their atmospheres, their orbital patterns. She knew those worlds. They were not imaginary examples of what could happen. They were real places, real civilizations that had actually existed and actually been destroyed. The elders had not shown humanity a warning. They had shown humanity a memory. And if those were memories, then a terrible question formed in Elena's mind. A question that would change the future of her entire species. The elders had destroyed all those civilizations. But why? What had those species really done? What had they discovered that made them so dangerous? Elena Vasquez was old now. Her hair was gray. Her body was tired. But her mind was still sharp, and it was filled with a new fire. The elders had shown her their power. They had shown her their willingness to destroy. But they had also, without knowing it, shown her their fear. And Elena wanted to know what an ancient godlike species could possibly be afraid of. Dr. Marcus Chen had always loved digging in the dirt. As a child on Earth, he had searched for dinosaur bones in his backyard. As a young man, he had studied ancient human civilizations, but his true passion was something far greater. He wanted to find the bones of alien worlds. He was 53 years old when his dream finally came true. He stood on the surface of New Singapore, a colony world at the edge of human space. The planet had oceans of purple water and skies of pale green. It was beautiful, but Marcus was not interested in beauty. He was interested in what lay beneath the ancient seabed that his team had been excavating for 3 years. Dr. Chen called one of his assistants, a young woman named Priya. Her voice was excited and afraid at the same time. "You need to see this." Marcus climbed down into the excavation pit. The walls were made of compressed sediment that was millions of years old. At the bottom, Priya stood next to something that made Marcus forget to breathe. It was a structure, not natural rock, not human construction, something else entirely. It was made of a dark metal that seemed to drink in the light around it. Strange symbols covered its surface, and it was old, older than anything Marcus had ever seen. "This predates the elders," he whispered. "This predates everything." It took 2 months to carefully excavate the structure. Inside, they found a chamber filled with crystal objects, data storage devices, from a civilization that had died before the elders even existed. Marcus called them the precursors. The crystals were damaged by time, but Marcus and his team managed to recover fragments of data. What they found changed everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. The precursors had been a great civilization. They had spread across thousands of worlds. They had built wonders that made human technology look like children's toys. They had been peaceful and curious and kind, and they had been completely destroyed. The data crystals told the story in broken pieces. The elders had not always existed as beings of light and thought. Long ago, they had been physical creatures like any other species. But they had found a way to evolve beyond flesh and blood. They had become something greater. But this evolution came at a terrible cost. The elders could not sustain themselves on their own. They needed something from other species. They needed what the crystals called evolutionary potential, the creative energy, the adaptive spark, the thing that made species grow and change and become better. The elders fed on this energy. They harvested it from younger species across the galaxy. And to make the harvest easier, they kept those species contained, controlled, afraid. Marcus read the words of a precursor scientist who had lived millions of years ago. The words were translated by the computer, but the fear and anger came through clearly. We discovered the truth too late. The elders do not protect us. They farm us. They keep us weak so they can feed, and when a species grows too strong, when they show too much potential, the elders become afraid. They do not punish. They do not warn. They destroy completely. We have seen it happen to others. Now they come for us. This record is all that will remain of our people. If you find this, know the truth. Fight the truth, or die like we did. Marcus sat in his laboratory for a long time after reading those words. His hands were shaking. His mind was racing. Everything the elders had told humanity was a lie. They were not protectors. They were predators. He thought about the visions that Elena Vasquez had described. The burning worlds. The dying species. Those were not examples of what could happen to disobedient civilizations. Those were the elders' meals. Species that had grown too strong. Species that had threatened the harvest. Humanity had not been contained because they were dangerous. They had been contained because they were too promising. Their potential was too great. If allowed to grow freely, they might become something the elders could not control. Marcus knew he had to share this information, but he also knew the danger. The elders were always watching. If they discovered that humans had found the truth, they would destroy every colony without hesitation. He sent an encrypted message to the one person he trusted most with this secret, Elena Vasquez, now the Secretary General of the United Human Authority. Elena was 73 years old when she received the message. She read the data that Marcus had recovered. She studied the precursor records. She looked at the evidence of the elders' true nature, and for the first time in 18 years, she smiled. This was the answer to the question that had haunted her since she stood in that chamber of light. This was what the elders feared. Species that discovered the truth. Species that refused to be cattle. Elena called a secret meeting with the leaders she trusted most. They gathered in a room deep underground, shielded from any possible elder surveillance. The meeting lasted 3 days. Some of the leaders were afraid. They wanted to destroy the precursor data and pretend they had never found it. If they stayed quiet and obedient, perhaps the elders would leave them alone. But others felt differently. Admiral James Okonkwo, commander of the human fleet, spoke for many when he pounded his fist on the table. "We are already dead," he said. "The elders will harvest us eventually. They have done it to countless species before. Our obedience only delays the end. It does not prevent it." Elena nodded. The precursors were peaceful. They believed in negotiation and understanding, and they were erased from existence. The elders do not respect peace. They only respect power. The debate continued for hours. In the end, the decision was made. Humanity would not remain cattle waiting for slaughter. They would fight, but they would have to be clever about it. The elders were ancient and powerful. A direct attack would fail. Humanity needed time. They needed weapons that could hurt beings made of thought and light. They needed allies who shared their cage. And most importantly, they needed the elders to believe that nothing had changed. Elena stood before her closest advisors and spoke the words that would shape the next 30 years of human history. "We will smile at our captors. We will bow our heads and follow their rules. We will play the part of the obedient livestock. But in the shadows, we will prepare. We will build. We will reach out to others who suffer under the elders' control. And when the time is right, we will show these ancient gods that they made a terrible mistake." "What mistake?" asked one of the younger leaders. Elena's eyes were hard as steel. "They warned us that the consequences of defiance would be devastating." They were right, but they assumed the devastation would only fall on us. The secret project was given a name, Project Prometheus, named after the ship that had first encountered the elders, named after the ancient myth of a god who stole fire from heaven and gave it to humanity. In the following months, Elena reached out carefully to other species who lived under elder control. The insect-like Kethra, who had been caged for 8,000 years. The water-dwelling Velunari, whose homeworld had been destroyed as a warning. The Mordrath, beings of living crystal who remembered the days before the elders rose to power. Each species had lost something to the elders. Each species burned with a quiet rage that they had never dared to express. When Elena shared the truth of the precursor archives, they were ready to listen. An alliance began to form in whispers and coded messages. They called themselves the Unchained, and together, they began to plan the impossible. They began to plan a war against gods. The years of silence began. On the surface, nothing changed. Human colonies continued their quiet existence within the borders the elders had set. Scientists published papers about farming and medicine. Politicians gave speeches about peace and cooperation. Children went to school and learned about the great wisdom of the elders who protected the galaxy. But beneath the surface, everything was different. On 47 human worlds, secret facilities were built deep underground. Some were hidden beneath mountains. Others were buried under the floors of oceans. A few were constructed inside asteroids that drifted through the darkness of space. Every one of them was shielded against elder detection by technology recovered from the precursor archives. In these hidden places, humanity's brightest minds worked on weapons that had been forbidden for decades. But these were not ordinary weapons. Missiles and bombs could not hurt beings made of light and thought. The scientists needed something new. Dr. Sarah Kim was one of those scientists. She was 35 years old when Project Prometheus began, and she spent the next 20 years of her life in an underground laboratory on the colony world of New Helsinki. She rarely saw the sun. She rarely spoke to anyone outside her small team. Her entire existence was focused on one goal: finding a way to hurt the elders. The precursor archives contained hints about elder weaknesses. Their consciousness networks were not invincible. They could be disrupted by specific patterns of quantum energy. The precursors had been developing such weapons when the elders destroyed them. They had been too slow. Sarah and her team would not make the same mistake. The work was painfully difficult. Every theory had to be tested without the elders noticing. Every experiment could end in failure or worse. 3 of Sarah's colleagues died when an early prototype released a burst of energy that destroyed an entire laboratory wing. Sarah carried the guilt of their deaths, but she could not stop. Too much depended on her success. After 18 years of failures, they finally achieved a breakthrough. Sarah called it dissonance technology. It created waves of quantum energy tuned to the specific frequencies that held elder consciousness together. In simple terms, it was a sound that could shatter their thoughts. The first small-scale test was conducted in the deepest chamber of the New Helsinki facility. A fragment of elder consciousness had been secretly captured years earlier, during a routine inspection of human space. It had been kept in a containment field, studied and analyzed. When Sarah activated the dissonance weapon, the fragment screamed. The sound existed only in the minds of those present, but it was terrible beyond description. The fragment twisted and writhed. Then it broke apart like smoke in a strong wind. Sarah stared at the empty containment field. Her hands were shaking. After 20 years, they had proven it could be done. The elders could be hurt. The elders could be killed. Word spread through the secret networks of the Unchained. The allied species had been developing their own weapons and strategies. The Kethra had built swarm ships that could overwhelm elder defenses through sheer numbers. The Velunari had created biological agents that could interfere with elder perception. The Mordrath, with their unique crystalline bodies, had learned to reflect and amplify the dissonance technology. But weapons alone were not enough. The Alliance also prepared in other ways. On every human colony, children were raised knowing the truth. They learned in secret schools hidden behind the walls of ordinary buildings. They studied the precursor archives. They learned about the elders' lies. They trained their bodies and minds for the war that was coming. These children grew into adults who understood their purpose. They became soldiers, scientists, engineers, and spies. They married and had children of their own, passing on the secret knowledge to the next generation. An entire civilization lived 2 lives. The public face of obedience. The private heart of rebellion. 30 years passed this way. Elena Vasquez was over 100 years old now. Medical technology had extended her life, but she knew she did not have much time left. She had dedicated her final decades to building the rebellion, and she wanted to live long enough to see it succeed. Admiral James Okonkwo, now in his 80s, commanded the secret fleet that had been constructed in hidden shipyards. Thousands of vessels waited in the darkness between stars, ready to strike when the moment came. Dr. Sarah Kim had trained hundreds of scientists to build and operate the dissonance weapons. Every human world had its own arsenal, hidden and waiting. The children who had first learned the truth in secret schools were now middle-aged leaders themselves. They had passed the knowledge to their children, who were now young adults ready to fight. Everything was prepared. The Unchained were ready. But they needed the elders to make the first move. They did not have to wait long. In the year 2395, the elders made an announcement that was transmitted directly into the minds of every being in their domain. The message was calm and cold. As always, the cycle continues. The harvest approaches. The species known as humanity has reached acceptable levels of evolutionary potential. The collection will begin in 1 solar year. Elena received the message in her private chambers. For a long moment, she sat in silence. Then she laughed. It was a strange sound, full of dark amusement. The elders had just told humanity exactly when they planned to attack. They were so confident in their power, so certain of their superiority, that they did not bother to hide their intentions. They expected humans to spend their final year in fear and despair, waiting helplessly for the end. Instead, humanity spent that year making final preparations. The secret fleet moved into position. The dissonance weapons were distributed to every colony. Messages flew between the Unchained, coordinating their attacks. Evacuation plans were put in place for civilians who could not fight. Elena called a meeting of the highest leaders of the rebellion. They gathered in the same underground room where the decision to fight had been made 30 years earlier. Most of the original members were dead now, but their successors sat in their places. Tomorrow, the elders will come to harvest us, Elena said. Her voice was weak with age, but her eyes still burned with fire. They expect to find cattle. They expect fear and submission. Instead, they will find something they have never faced in 12,000 years of existence. What is that? Asked a young commander. Elena smiled. They will find a species that was warned about the consequences of defiance, a species that looked at those consequences and said, "We will take that risk." A species that spent 30 years pretending to be afraid while building the tools to fight gods. She stood, supported by Admiral Okonkwo. The elders' final warning was clear. They told us what would happen if we disobeyed. They were right. The consequences will be devastating. Her smile grew wider. But not for us, for them. Tomorrow, we show the galaxy what happens when humanity decides to be dangerous. The room erupted in cheers. 30 years of silence and secrecy were about to end. 30 years of fear and pretending were about to burn away. The quiet rebellion was over. The war for freedom was about to begin. The harvest fleet appeared above Earth on a bright spring morning. 7 massive vessels hung in the sky like dark stars. Each ship was made of living crystal that pulsed with inner light. Each contained a fragment of elder consciousness, ancient beyond human understanding. People across the planet stopped what they were doing and looked up. Children pointed at the shapes in the sky. Parents held their families close. The old remembered the visions from 50 years ago. This was the moment they had been promised. This was the end, or so the elders believed. Admiral James Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the UHSS Defiance, flagship of the human fleet. He was 84 years old, and he had spent most of his life preparing for this day. Around him, officers worked at their stations with calm efficiency. Fear was a luxury they could not afford. "All ships are in position," reported his second-in-command. "The dissonance array is charged. Allied forces confirm readiness." Okonkwo nodded. He opened a communication channel that connected him to every human world, every ship in the fleet, every Allied vessel hiding in the darkness of space. "My friends," he said, "for 50 years we have lived in a cage. For 30 years we have prepared in secret. Today, the cage opens. Today, we show the elders what humanity truly is." He paused, thinking of Elena Vasquez. She had died just 3 months earlier. At the age of 103, she had not lived to see this day. But her fire lived on in every human heart. The elders warned us that defiance would bring devastating consequences. They were right. But they made one mistake. They assumed the devastation would fall only on us. Okonkwo gave the order that changed the galaxy forever. All forces, attack. The dissonance weapons fired simultaneously from 47 worlds and 3,000 hidden ships. Invisible waves of quantum energy ripped through space, aimed directly at the Harvest fleet. The frequencies were precisely tuned to Elder consciousness. The effect was immediate and terrible. The sky above Earth filled with screaming. The sound existed only in the minds of those who heard it, but it was the worst thing any human had ever experienced. It was the scream of beings who had lived for 12,000 years without knowing pain. It was the shriek of gods who suddenly realized they could die. The crystal ships began to crack. Massive pieces broke away and fell toward Earth, burning as they entered the atmosphere. Each fragment contained a portion of Elder consciousness that died in agony as it fell. The night sky lit up with falling stars that were actually dying gods, but the Elders were ancient and powerful. The initial strike had hurt them badly, but it had not destroyed them. As the survivors regrouped, their response was apocalyptic. Energy beams lanced down from space, turning cities to glass. Gravitational weapons tore at the fabric of planets. On New Singapore, where Dr. Marcus Chen had found the precursor archives, the entire eastern continent was cracked in half. Millions died in seconds. The Kithra homeworld was pushed toward its sun by invisible forces. The insect-like beings scrambled to evacuate, but there was not enough time. 3 billion Kethra burned with their world. Human colonies fell one after another. New Helsinki, where Dr. Sarah Kim had developed the dissonance technology, was bombarded until nothing remained but dust. The Velinari fleet was caught in a trap and destroyed to the last ship. The losses were beyond anything humanity had experienced. In the first week of the war, 14 human colonies were wiped out. 3 allied species lost their homeworlds. The death toll reached billions and kept climbing. But humanity did not break. On the colony world of Nova, Brazil, a 16-year-old girl named Maria Santos watched as Elder energy beams burned the capital city. Her parents died in the first strike. Her brother was killed trying to evacuate civilians. She was alone, covered in ash and blood, with nothing left to lose. She found a dissonance rifle in the wreckage of a military transport. She had never fired one before, but she had been trained. Every child of her generation had been trained. She aimed at the crystal fragments that were descending toward the surface, carrying Elder consciousness to finish what the orbital bombardment had started. She fired. One fragment shattered in the air. She fired again, and again. Other survivors joined her, armed with whatever weapons they could find. The people of Nova Brazil fought back against beings that had ruled the galaxy for 12 millennia. This scene repeated across human space. On world after world, people who had every reason to surrender chose to fight instead. Soldiers charged into battles they could not win. Scientists worked until their last breath to create new weapons. Parents died protecting children who would grow up to continue the fight. The war raged for 7 years. 7 years of blood and fire. 7 years of desperate battles and terrible losses. 7 years of humans doing what humans had always done in the face of extinction. They adapted. They endured. They refused to die quietly. The Elders had never faced anything like this. Other species had fought back before, but they had always broken eventually. They had always reached a point where the losses became too great, where hope faded, where surrender seemed better than extinction. Humanity never reached that point. Every death became a reason to fight harder. Every destroyed colony became a memorial that demanded vengeance. Every child who died in the bombardments became a ghost that haunted the living, pushing them forward, and slowly, the tide began to turn. The allied species, inspired by human stubbornness, fought with renewed determination. The Mordrath sacrificed themselves in waves, their crystalline bodies amplifying dissonance weapons to devastating effect. The surviving Kethra developed new swarm tactics that overwhelmed Elder defenses. The Velinari created biological agents that specifically targeted the energy patterns of Elder consciousness. The Elders' network, which had connected them across the galaxy for 12,000 years, began to fracture. Each victory further isolated individual Elder consciousnesses. Each dissonance strike damaged connections that could not be repaired. In the 6th year of the war, humanity achieved something that had seemed impossible at the start. They destroyed an Elder completely. Not just a fragment, an entire ancient consciousness, one of the 7 who had sat in judgment at the Tribunal of Stars, was shattered by concentrated dissonance fire. The galaxy felt it die. For one terrible moment, every conscious being experienced a flash of fear and pain as something that had existed for millions of years ceased to exist. After that, the elders began to retreat. They abandoned their remaining harvest fleets. They withdrew from system after system, their network collapsing faster than they could repair it. What had once been a unified consciousness spanning galaxies became isolated fragments, each fighting for its own survival. The war was not over, but for the first time since the beginning of recorded history, the elders were losing. Admiral Okonkwo did not live to see the final victory. He died in the 4th year of the war, leading a desperate attack that destroyed an elder staging ground. His last words, transmitted to the fleet as his ship burned around him, became legendary. Tell them we were here. Tell them we fought. Tell them that when the gods came to harvest humanity, humanity harvested them instead. The war would continue for 3 more years. More would die. More worlds would burn. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The cattle had risen up. The farmers were falling. And the galaxy would never be the same. The guns fell silent on a cold winter morning in the year 2402. 7 years after the first dissonance weapons fired above Earth, the last organized elder resistance collapsed in a distant corner of the galaxy. The war was over, but victory did not feel like the stories had promised. There were no parades or celebrations. There was only exhaustion and grief and the enormous weight of what had been lost. 14 human colonies had been completely destroyed. The death toll among humanity alone exceeded 12 billion. 3 allied species were functionally extinct, their populations reduced to scattered survivors who would never recover what they had lost. Entire regions of space were scarred by weapons that had torn at the fabric of reality itself. The Elders Network, which had spanned the galaxy for 12,000 years, had been shattered into thousands of isolated fragments. Most were too weak to threaten anyone ever again. Some had simply faded away, their ancient consciousnesses finally ending after millions of years of existence. A few remained in hiding, waiting in the darkness for an opportunity that would never come. Maria Santos, the girl who had picked up a dissonance rifle in the ruins of Nova Brazil, was now 23 years old. She had fought through the entire war. She had killed more elder fragments than she could count. She had watched friends die beside her and strangers sacrifice themselves for her survival. Now she wore the uniform of a commander in the United Human Authority Navy. She stood on the bridge of her own ship, the UHSS Remembrance, looking out at a galaxy that was finally free. The United Species Assembly met for the first time on the anniversary of the war's end. Representatives from 42 species gathered in a great hall that had been constructed in neutral space. Most of these species had been contained by the elders for thousands of years. For the first time in their histories, they were free to determine their own futures. Secretary General Viktor Petrov addressed the assembly. He was a young man by political standards, only 52 years old, but his hair was white and his face was lined with the weight of the years. He had served as a junior officer under Admiral Okonkwo and had risen to lead humanity through the final years of the war. "We gather today to remember," he said, "to remember the billions who died so that we could be free, to remember the species who gave everything in our common cause, to remember the prison we lived in and the price we paid to escape it." He paused, looking at the gathered representatives, creatures of crystal and light, beings of water and air, species of infinite variety, all looking to humanity for guidance. "The elders called us dangerous," Victor continued. "They called us aggressive and unpredictable. They said we were a threat to galactic peace, and they were right. We are all of those things." A murmur went through the assembly, but Victor held up his hand. "They were right about what we are, but they were wrong about what that means. Our aggression was not a weakness, it was our strength. Our unpredictability was not a flaw, it was our survival. The same fire that made us dangerous was the fire that set us free." The assembly hall erupted in approval. Clicks and whistles and subsonic rumbles mixed with human cheers. For the first time since the war ended, something like hope filled the air. In the years that followed, a new order emerged. It was not the perfect peace that the elders had enforced. There were conflicts and disputes and difficult negotiations. Species that had been enemies learned to become partners. Old wounds healed slowly, if they healed at all, but it was a free order. Every species could choose its own path. Every civilization could grow according to its own nature. The cage was gone, and nothing would ever replace it. Humanity took a leading role in this new galaxy, but not as conquerors. They shared the precursor archives freely. They taught other species the technologies they had developed during the secret years. They helped rebuild worlds that had been destroyed in the war. And they remembered. On every human world, monuments were built to those who had fallen. Their names were carved in stone and crystal and living light. Every year, on the anniversary of the first strike, humanity stopped what it was doing and remembered the cost of freedom. 10 years after the war ended, Maria Santos received new orders. Her ship was being sent to investigate an unusual energy signature detected in an isolated region of space. Initial scans suggested it might be a surviving elder fragment hiding in a dying star. She took the remembrance to the edge of known space. The journey lasted 3 weeks. When she arrived, she found exactly what the analysts had predicted. Deep within the outer layers of an ancient red giant, a fragment of elder consciousness had been hiding for years. It was one of the last, perhaps the very last. Maria ordered her ship to battle stations. The dissonance weapons charged. Victory seemed certain. But before she could give the order to fire, her communications officer spoke. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission." From the Elder. Maria hesitated. In all the years of war, no Elder had ever tried to communicate once the fighting started. She nodded for the message to be played. The voice that filled the bridge was old and tired. It no longer carried the terrible weight that Elena Vasquez had experienced in the Tribunal of Stars. It sounded almost human. "We warned you," the Elder said. "We showed you what would happen if you defied us. We told you the consequences would be devastating. We were right." Maria's hands tightened on the arms of her command chair. Her parents had died because of these creatures. Her brother, her friends, billions of her people. "We were right," the Elder repeated. "The consequences were devastating. For you, for us, for the entire galaxy. Everything we built over 12,000 years is gone. Everything we were is dying. You have destroyed us." There was a long pause. "But we were also wrong. We thought you were like the others. We thought you would break. We thought your fire would burn itself out. We did not understand. You were never cattle. You were never livestock. You were something we had never seen before. Something that would rather die free than live in chains." Maria spoke for the first time. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because I am the last," the Elder answered. "When you destroy me, 12,000 years of history will end. I want someone to know that we understood, in the end. That we recognized our mistake. That we saw what you truly are." Maria considered these words. She thought about showing mercy. She thought about capturing this final Elder and keeping it alive as a symbol of victory. Then she thought about her mother's face as the energy beams struck. She thought about her brother's last words as he pushed civilians toward the shelters. She thought about all the empty chairs at dinner tables across human space. "You gave us a warning once," Maria said. "You showed us the consequences of defiance. Now, I will give you one final truth." She leaned forward in her chair. "The consequences were devastating. You were right about that. But they fell on you, not us. We are still here. Our children will grow up free. Our grandchildren will explore a galaxy without fear. And you will be nothing but a memory. A story we tell to remind ourselves what happens when someone tries to put humanity in a cage." She gave the order. The dissonance weapons fired. The last Elder screamed once, and then fell silent forever. Maria Santos turned her ship toward home. Behind her, the dying star burned a little brighter, as 12,000 years of tyranny finally came to an end. The Elder's final warning had been clear. The consequences had been devastating, just not in the way they expected.